My next topic is the Government of India Act 1919. I have also divided this topic into three sections. The first section deals with the causes of this act. The second section deals with the features of this act. And the third section deals with the appraisal of this act. Here I would like to discuss in brief the causes of this act. This act was passed by the British Parliament in 1919. This act was based on the Montague-Chelmsford report of 1918. Edwin Montague was the Secretary of State and Chelmsford was the Governor General of India at that time. Therefore, this act is also known as Montague-Chelmsford Reform Scheme or Mont-Ford Reforms. There were a large number of causes and factors responsible for this act, and these causes collectively forced the government to pass this act within a short span of 10 years after the passing of Indian Consuls Act of 1909. Here are some of the causes of this act. The first cause of this act was the failure of the Act of 1909 to satisfy the Indians. The Act of 1909 failed to satisfy even the moderate sections of the Congress. Under this act, the government did not establish even a semblance of responsible government. Communal electorate was extended. Separate representation was given to Muslims. Franchise was extremely limited and it was based on discrimination. Only a few hundred people were given the right to vote who possessed certain types of qualifications. And finally, all the powers were in the hands of Governor General in respect of Imperial Legislative Assembly and governors in respect of their respective provinces. So the Indians were not satisfied with this act and they continued their demand of responsible government. Another factor of this act was the change in the policy of Muslim League and its coming closer with the Congress. There were certain factors which forced the Muslim League to move away from the British loyalty and come closer with the Congress. In 1911, Bengal was unified against the wishes of Muslim League. In 1911-1912, the British supported the enemies of Turkey in Turco-Italian War in 1911 and Balkan Wars in 1911-1912. The Sultan of Turkey was regarded as religious and political head, known as Khalifa by the Muslims all over the world. The Congress adopted a sympathetic attitude towards Turkey during this time, and this was responsible for bringing Muslim League closer with the Congress. Further, there emerged young leadership among the Muslim League which was inclined towards nationalism. All these factors forced the Muslim League to change its earlier policy, and in 1930 it changed its constitution and made the attainment of self-government as the goal of Muslim League. Another factor responsible for this act was a resurgence of revolutionary activities The First World War started in 1914 and the government of Britain was occupied in this war. This provided opportunity for revolutionary activities, for the resurgence of revolutionary activities and the nationalist movement in India. The revolutionaries established Ghadar movement in 1913 with the aim to organize mutinies in the armed forces against the British. Then the revolutionaries made efforts to organize mutiny among Indian troops stationed abroad. Then the revolutionaries also tried to enlist the support of the Amir of Afghanistan against the British in India. These factors created fear in the minds of official circles in India and forced the British government to provide a fresh package of reforms in order to win away the moderate and other liberal sections of Indian nationalism towards them. Another cause of this act was the repressive measures by the government. The government of India, in order to suppress the nationalist movement, adopted various repressive measures. It passed the Indian Press Act 1910 and Seditious Meetings Act 1913. Then in 1915, Defence of India Act was passed. Then in the same year, conspiracy trials against the revolutionaries and internationalists were held and a large number of Indians were punished. But it bore no positive results for the British because this created further wedge between the British authorities and the Indian people. And British realized this, so they were forced to adopt such measures which would be very useful for the British to win the support of Indians for strengthening the rule of British in India. Then another most important factor which forced the British government to think in terms of some reform was the Lucknow Pact and the reunion of moderates and extremists. Moderates and extremists were split in 1907 and they got united in 1916 once again. This was to the great disliking of the British because they wanted division among the nationalist circles. In the same year, another important event happened and it was the Lucknow Pact between the Muslim League and the Congress, the two rival parties. Both these parties held their sessions in Lucknow and separately passed the same resolution. There were certain features in this resolution, and one of the features was the attainment of the self-government as their goal. This unity and these future programs of these nationalists created a great fear among the official circles, and they began to think in terms of such measures which would win the liberal sections and create division among the Indians on the basis of religion and other bases. So therefore the British thought it better to give some reforms which would be very useful for them in order to strengthen their rule in India. Then the next factor of this act was the Home Rule movement in 1916. This movement was launched by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, the tallest extremist leader, and Annie Besant in 1916. Thousands of people were attracted by the Home Rule movement, and this created a huge pressure upon the government to make fresh reforms, to announce about the fresh reforms. Then another factor which forced the government to provide some reforms, to provide some relief, was the First World War. This World War started in 1914 and continued till 1918. Britain also joined this war and made a declaration that it was going to participate in the war to make the world safe for democracy. Indians realized that the same democratic rights would be given to them after the end of the war. Therefore, they supported the British war efforts. On the other hand, they continued their demand for the self-government. After the end of the war, British adopted a mixed policy. On the one hand, it announced a fresh package of reforms. On the other hand, it formulated, it made some repressive laws for suppressing the Indian nationalist movement. Then, on 20th of August 1917, the Secretary of State Edwin Montague made an important declaration in the British Parliament. This was done so because the government had adopted all measures to suppress the Indian nationalism. Therefore, now they realized that it was essential for them to adopt a path of conciliation instead of suppression. Therefore, on 20th August 1917, the Secretary of State made declaration that there would be an increasing association of Indians in every branch of administration, and that there would be a gradual development of self-governing institutions, and that there would be progressive realization of responsible government in India. This was a clear signal that in future a responsible government would be established in India. It was under this circumstance the British government was forced. All these factors combined together forced the British government to announce some package of reforms. Otherwise, the situation would go out of their hands, and it would be very difficult for the British to establish their hold over India. Therefore, the Secretary of State, the Governor General of India, and the local governments started lengthy discussions. Ultimately, as a result of these discussions, the Secretary of State, Edwin Montague, made a reforms proposal in 1918, and which were published both in England and in India. On the basis of this reforms proposal, a bill was introduced in British Parliament in 1919, and which received the royal assent on 23rd of December 1919. After the passage of this bill, it came to be known as Government of India Act 1919. Under this act, the British tried to make Indian people to realize that the British government had established a responsible government, but in reality, it was the British government tried in a clever way to make only claims and don't provide any substantial to the Indians, so the Indians were not once again satisfied by these reforms and decided to boycott this reform package as well. Thank you.